They say success changes people. But that's not true. Success doesn't change you, it reveals you. It peels back the polite smiles, the fake friendships, the words people say to keep you small. It shows who was really rooting for you, and who was secretly waiting for you to fail. My name's Frank Delaney. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent most of my life covered in dust, sweat, and drywall powder. If you drive down the main stretch of Westheimer Road in Houston, you'll see a tall glass building glinting under the Texas sun. Right at the top, in bold white letters, it says Delaney Construction Group. Yeah, that's my name. The same name my so-called best friend once laughed at. I still remember the day he said it, clear as the heat waves rolling off a summer road. We were in our 20s, sitting on the back of a pickup truck after a long shift. He looked at me, smirked, and said, "Frank, you'll never be anybody. You're just the help." He said it like it was a joke, but it stuck. It burrowed into my chest like a splinter you can't pull out, and for years, I carried that splinter. But life has a strange sense of humor. Because years later, that same man, the one who told me I'd never be anybody, walked through the glass doors of my building. He didn't recognize me at first. Not because I looked that different, but because in his mind, I couldn't possibly be the man sitting behind that mahogany desk with my name etched on the wall behind me. When his eyes finally met mine, I saw something flicker, disbelief, then confusion, then that cold sweat of realization. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph, I just felt quiet. This story isn't about bragging, it's about betrayal. It's about lessons that took decades to learn, and the kind of revenge that doesn't need shouting or screaming. The kind that happens when time, patience, and hard work do the talking for you. So sit back, and let me tell you how a nobody, a man everyone once overlooked, became the name on the building people can't ignore. Section 1. Back when dreams cost too much, I was born and raised in a small Texas town that didn't have much except dust, heat, and people who minded each other's business a little too much. You could tell everything about someone just by looking at their boots, the scuffs, the mud, the color of the dust. That's how small it was. My dad was a mechanic, worked sun up to sundown fixing engines that were older than he was. He wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but he was proud. He used to say, "Frank, a man's worth isn't in what he drives, it's in how he drives it." And I believed him. My hands got calloused before I even turned 15. I'd help him in the garage after school, holding wrenches, wiping oil, learning how machines think. I didn't have the kind of life that led to college. My future was written in grease and sweat, and honestly, back then, I was okay with that. That's around the time I met Eddie Collins. Eddie was the golden boy of our town. His dad owned the hardware store. His mom taught Sunday school, and his smile could have sold sunshine to Texans. He was the kind of guy who never had dirt under his nails, always had new shoes, new jeans, and a confidence that made people listen when he spoke. But Eddie wasn't mean. Not at first. He was charming, funny, and he had this way of making you believe in bigger things. I liked that about him. He made me think maybe we could do more than just swing hammers our whole lives. We became friends fast. We'd drive out to the old quarry after work, drink a couple of beers, and talk about what we'd do if we ever had real money. I remember once he said, "Frank, one day we're going to build something with our names on it. Something big enough that folks in Dallas will know who we are." And I laughed, thinking it was a nice dream, crazy, but nice. After high school, we both joined Henderson Builders, the biggest construction company in the area. Now, Eddie, he got a desk job in the office. I got a shovel and a hard hat. He wore button-up shirts. I wore steel-toed boots. He drank coffee out of a company mug. I drank water from a hose, but we still hung out. After shifts, we'd sit on the tailgate and plan out this business we wanted to start. Delaney and Collins Contracting. We had it all mapped out. He'd handle the clients, the numbers, the talking. I'd handle the work, the building, the blueprints, the dirt and dust. It was a good balance. He had the words, I had the hands. But dreams. Dreams cost more than either of us realized. They cost time, trust, and sometimes friendship. I didn't see it back then. But Eddie was changing. Every month in that office, he got a little slicker. New watch, new haircut, new ego. Meanwhile, I was out there breaking my back under the sun, eating sandwiches that tasted like sawdust, still believing we were building something together. Looking back now, I think that's when the cracks started forming. When one friend starts looking up, and the other starts being looked down on. I remember one day after work, he said something that stuck with me, just offhand, casual. He said, "Frank, you're great with your hands, man, but not everyone's cut out for running things." He said it like a compliment, but it felt like a warning, like he was already stepping away from us and toward himself. But I shrugged it off. I thought, nah, Eddie's my friend. He'd never leave me behind. I was wrong, and I'd learned soon enough that the higher a man climbs, the smaller his friends start to look from where he's standing. You ever have one of those moments in life where everything feels like it's finally lining up? Where after years of working your hands raw, sweating under the Texas sun, you start to think, maybe my luck's turning. That's exactly where I was. For the first time, I could actually see the dream Eddie and I had talked about sitting on that tailgate so many years before. I'd been saving every dime I could, fixing up old sheds on weekends, patching roofs in the evenings after work, doing whatever I could to scrape together enough to make our idea real. Delaney and Collins Contracting. It wasn't just a name. It was the promise of something bigger than either of us alone. After months of planning, chasing suppliers, sketching out budgets on napkins and scrap paper, I finally found an investor. Not a big one, just a small-town guy who believed in local builders. He liked my honesty, my work ethic. He said, "Frank, I don't know much about blueprints, but I know when a man's word means something." He was willing to take a chance on me. Honest, I remember the night I told Eddie. We met at our usual spot, the back booth at Riley's Diner, where the coffee always tasted burnt and the waitress called everyone Hon. It was late, the neon sign outside flickering against the window like it was struggling to stay alive. I was tired, dirty, still in my work boots, but I couldn't stop grinning. "Eddie," I said, leaning across the table, "I found someone, an investor. Enough to get us off the ground. We can finally start Delaney and Collins." I'll never forget his face. For a moment, his smile looked genuine. That same easy grin he used to have when we were kids. But then it changed. The corners of his mouth twitched like he was holding back something. He sat back, ran his thumb along his fancy watch, and gave me this slow, lazy smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Frank," he said, voice smooth as oil, "you're dreaming too small." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, too small?" "This is it, man. This is what we've been planning for years." He chuckled. That fake kind of laugh people use when they already think they're above you. "Why not join me instead?" "I've got a bigger fish on the hook." My stomach sank. "What bigger fish?" He looked around, lowered his voice, and leaned in like he was about to tell me a secret that would change my life. "Martin Rhodes," he said, his tone dripping with pride. "Big-time developer out of Dallas. He's been looking for someone to head up a new construction venture. I've been talking to him for weeks." For weeks. That hit harder than he realized. While I was breaking my back trying to make our dream happen, he was in air-conditioned offices, making calls behind my back. I tried to make sense of it. You've been talking to someone else? Without telling me?" He shrugged, totally unfazed. "It's just business, Frank. You wouldn't understand those 5 words. They cut deeper than any blade. You wouldn't understand." I just sat there staring at him. This was the same guy who used to eat bologna sandwiches with me on construction breaks, who used to say we were brothers, who once told me we'd make our mark together, and now he was talking down to me like I was some hired hand who didn't belong in the big leagues. I remember my coffee had gone cold. The waitress came by, topped off his cup, and he thanked her like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, my world was cracking right down the middle. "So, what happens to Delaney and Collins?" I asked, my voice quieter now, heavy. He didn't even hesitate. "I dropped your name. Rhodes wanted someone who could represent his image. You know, connections, business sense, that kind of thing. Drop my name. Just like that." I looked at him across that chipped diner table, and for the first time I saw him for who he really was. Not the golden boy, not the dreamer, not my friend. Just another man who thought loyalty was optional. I didn't say much after that. Didn't yell, didn't make a scene. I just nodded, finished my coffee, and walked out into the night. The air smelled like rain and asphalt, and for the first time in years I didn't know where I was heading. The next morning, I went to work like nothing happened. But something inside me had cracked. Every hammer swing, every pour of concrete felt heavier. When I saw other guys working in pairs, laughing, sharing lunch, it hurt. Because that used to be us. Weeks turned into months, and I watched from the sidelines as Colin's development started popping up in the papers. New projects, new contracts, Eddie's smiling face shaking hands with men in suits. I even saw his interview once on TV, talking about how he started from humble beginnings. He didn't mention me. Not once. Meanwhile, I was patching driveways for $50, fixing broken fences, cleaning up after storms just to make rent. I'd drive past his new office sometimes, just sit there in my old pickup truck, engine idling, watching people in suits walk in and out. I never hated them. I just couldn't stop wondering how a man who once shared his dreams with me could walk away like that, clean as if those years never happened. People told me to let it go. They said, "Frank, that's just how business works. Don't take it personal." But it was personal. It wasn't about losing a deal or missing out on money. It was about losing a brother, someone I'd trusted like family. There were nights I couldn't sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling, hearing his voice in my head. "You're just the help, Frank." And maybe he was right. Maybe I was just the help. But deep down, something inside me refused to stay that way. Because when someone betrays you like that, it either breaks you, man, or it builds something stronger in you. I didn't know it yet. But that night in Riley's diner wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a long road that would turn all that pain into purpose. Still, at that time, all I had was anger. The quiet kind that doesn't shout, just burns slow. And in that slow burn, I made myself a promise. One day, I'd make something of my own. Something real. Something no one could take away. Even if it took me the rest of my life. You ever have those stretches of years that feel like one long gray afternoon, where every sunrise looks the same and every night you fall asleep wondering if tomorrow will finally be different? But it never really is. That was my life from 30 to 40. A whole decade that felt like living in the shadow of someone else's story. While Eddie Collins was out there building Collins Developments, plastering his name on billboards and business cards, shaking hands with men in suits and giving interviews about hard work and ambition, I was still patching up broken fences and fixing leaky roofs in the back streets of Houston. He was sitting in conference rooms with polished tables. I was kneeling on splintered floors with a hammer and a prayer. I rented this old single-wide trailer off the highway, the kind of place where the pipes screamed every time you ran hot water, and the roof leaked every time it even thought about raining. My boots stayed by the door, my tools sat by the couch, and most nights dinner was just canned beans and cornbread if I had time to make it. But here's the thing. I never stopped working. I couldn't. There was this quiet part of me that refused to quit even when everything else said I should. Every nail I drove in, every wall I framed, every roof I patched, I learned something new. Not just about construction, but about people. I learned who keeps their word when times get hard. I learned how to read silence. What it means when someone avoids your eyes after promising they'd pay you next week. I learned patience. Real, bone-deep patience. The kind you earn after years of doing things the hard way because it's the only way you know how. I'll admit, there were nights I sat out on that little porch, beer in hand, looking at the horizon and thinking about Eddie. I wondered if he ever thought about me, the friend he left behind, the partner he cut out of the picture. Then I'd shake it off because thinking about him didn't pay the bills, and bitterness doesn't buy groceries. By the time I hit 42, I figured if no one was going to give me a chance, I'd make my own. So I started a little one-man operation I called Delaney Repairs. It wasn't much, just me, an old Ford truck that coughed more than it ran, and a folder full of handwritten invoices. No fancy logo, no website, just a man with tools and his word. My first few clients came through word of mouth. A retired teacher who needed her fence fixed. A small diner that had a broken back door, a church that needed new steps. I charged fair, showed up on time, and never took shortcuts. People like that. Before long, one client led to another and then another. That's how real success grows. Slow, steady, honest. Like concrete curing in the sun. You don't rush it. You just trust the process. I remember this one job for a widow named Mrs. Green. She was living alone, barely making ends meet. Her porch had collapsed and she couldn't afford a big company to fix it. So I did it for half price and told her she could pay me whenever she could. Took her 3 months, but she did. Every week she'd stop by with a few dollars in an envelope saying, "Almost there, Mr. Delaney." That's when I realized integrity builds its own kind of wealth. Not the kind you can deposit, but the kind that lets you sleep at night. After a couple years, business picked up. I hired 2 helpers, young guys in their 20s full of energy and no clue how to hold a hammer right. I taught them what my dad taught me: measure twice, cut once, and never lie to a customer. By 45, I had 5 men working under me, steady jobs coming in and more trust in my name than I ever thought possible. I wasn't rich. Not even close. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something real, something no one could take away. Every time I saw one of my old beat-up repair trucks drive by with Delaney Repairs stenciled on the side, I'd smile, not because it was big or flashy, but because it was mine. Built from nothing but grit and stubbornness. Sometimes I'd still see Collins Developments in the news, Eddie standing there in expensive suits beside shiny new buildings, cameras flashing. I'd wonder if he remembered the nights at Riley's diner, drawing up plans on napkins promising we'd always have each other's back. But the difference between us was simple. He built for fame. I built for pride. He wanted to be seen. I wanted to stand. And as the years rolled on, that slow, steady growth and that long crawl through, the dust became the foundation for something far greater than either of us could have imagined, back when we were just 2 dreamers drinking cheap beer after work. Because when life buries you in dirt, you can either suffocate or you can use it to grow, and I was just getting started. It was one of those Texas Thursdays when the air feels like it's pressing down on your shoulders. Thick, hot, and humming with the kind of tension that only comes before a storm. I was halfway through fixing a faulty AC unit in a diner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something in me, call it instinct, call it fate, told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, the kind that tries to sound casual but carries a hint of urgency. Mr. Delaney? We've been referred to your company for a commercial renovation downtown. Are you available for a meeting tomorrow morning? A big job in the heart of Houston. That didn't happen every day for a small business like mine. Sure, I said, wiping the sweat from my neck. Name of the company? There was a pause. Just a fraction too long. Collins Developments, the voice replied. For a moment, the world went quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. I just stood there, my hand frozen on the phone. The sound of that name slicing through a decade's worth of dust I thought I'd already buried. Collins Developments, Eddie's empire. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the rush of memories, all the laughter, the betrayal, the sting of those words, "You'll never be anybody, Frank." Yeah, I finally said. I know the name. I'll be there. The next morning I put on my cleanest shirt, not new but pressed and neat, and drove downtown. The streets shimmered with heat, the kind that made the pavement look like glass. My old Ford rumbled into the business district, surrounded by shiny SUVs and sedans that probably cost more than my house. The building I was headed to was one of those sleek glass towers, all steel, mirrors, and confidence. Collins Developments was etched across the entrance in bold silver letters, catching the morning light. Funny how life works. I used to dream of walking into a building like that as a partner. Now I was walking in as the contractor. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. I'd made peace with my scars. The receptionist looked up as I entered. "Mr. Delaney, they're expecting you in the boardroom on the 12th floor." I thanked her and stepped into the elevator. The ride up felt longer than it should have. Each floor dinged like a heartbeat, steady and heavy. By the time the doors slid open, I could almost taste the ghosts of the past. And then I saw him, Eddie Collins. Same slick smile, same gold watch, but the shine had faded. His hair was thinning and there were deep lines around his eyes, not from laughter but from sleepless nights. His once proud posture had softened just slightly, like a man holding up too much weight for too long. He was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, talking big, gesturing with confidence, laughing a little too loud. But if you've known a man as long as I'd known Eddie, you can spot the cracks. His voice trembled at the edges. The board members nodded politely, but I saw the looks, the kind people give when they're losing faith. He was drowning, and trying to convince everyone he was still floating. I waited quietly near the door until one of his assistants noticed me. "Mr. Collins, this is Frank Delaney from Delaney Repairs." Eddie turned, and the moment his eyes met mine, Time froze. For a second, he just stared, his mouth parting slightly, the color draining from his face like someone had pulled the plug. You could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to place me among all the faces from his past. "Frank," he finally said, voice uncertain. "Is that really you?" I smiled, calm and steady. "In the flesh, Eddie, been a long time." He blinked, laughed, that nervous little chuckle people use when the ground shifts beneath them. "Well, I'll be damned. Look at you. You run this place now?" "Delaney Construction Group," I said, slipping my card onto the table. "We handle restoration and commercial contracting. Your assistant said you needed help with a renovation project." The room went silent. A few of the board members glanced at my card, then back at me, realizing what the logo meant. My company wasn't small anymore. Over the last few years, I'd built something real: crews, contracts, offices. And the name Delaney carried weight now. Eddie's smile faltered for just a split second. "Delaney Construction Group," he repeated quietly, like the words had thorns. He tried to recover. "Well, it's good to see you doing well, Frank. You always were." "Persistent." I tilted my head. "Persistent? That's one way to put it. You still calling me a nobody?" The question hit harder than it sounded. A few people shifted in their seats. Eddie laughed again, louder this time, trying to smooth over the tension. "Hey, come on, man, that was years ago. We were kids just joking around." But his eyes told the truth. Behind that forced grin was fear, the kind that crawls up your spine when karma finally finds your address. The meeting went on. He laid out the details, a renovation for one of their downtown properties that had gone over budget. The building was half finished, deadlines slipping, contractors walking out because of unpaid invoices. I listened, nodded, asked a few questions. But what struck me most wasn't the numbers. It was the desperation in his tone. Eddie Collins, the golden boy of Houston real estate, was bleeding out quietly behind polished glass walls. Bad investments, lawsuits, angry partners. He needed someone who could deliver results and salvage his reputation. And fate, in all its strange poetry, had sent him me. After the meeting, the boardroom cleared out, leaving just the two of us. Eddie loosened his tie, exhaling hard. "Frank, listen. I know we had our differences, but I could really use your help here. You've got a solid reputation. The city inspector recommended you himself. I didn't even realize it was you until today." I folded my arms, watching him. "You didn't realize a lot of things back then either." He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Fair enough. Look, I'm not proud of how things ended. I was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. But you know how this business works, and it's dog-eat-dog out there." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I learned that lesson from you." For a long moment, we just stood there in the quiet hum of the office. The city skyline glimmered through the window. All those towers and names, monuments to men who thought they'd built something permanent. I thought of how the years had changed us. He'd spent his chasing approval, deals, headlines. I'd spent mine earning trust, one honest job at a time. And now here we were, the builder and the betrayer, standing on opposite sides of a cracked foundation. Finally, I reached out my hand. "Send me the blueprints, Eddie. We'll take a look." His shoulders dropped, relief flooding his face. "Thanks, Frank. I won't forget this." I smiled faintly. "You already did once." Then I walked out, leaving him standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. As I rode the elevator down, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. Older, yes, grayer, but stronger. I realized something in that moment. Success doesn't always announce itself with noise and glory. Sometimes it walks quietly, wearing work boots and carrying a blueprint. Fate had circled back, and this time, I wasn't the kid with calloused hands and a dream. I was the man with the name on the building, and Eddie Collins was about to learn what it meant to build something on lies and watch it crumble piece by piece. You know, there's a special kind of power in staying silent when every part of you wants to speak. That day in Eddie's boardroom, I could have ended him with a few words. I could have turned to those investors, men and women who hung on his every claim, and told them who he really was, told them about the lies, the betrayal, the way he'd built his so-called empire on stolen dreams, but I didn't, not because I was scared, not because I wanted to spare him, but because I'd learned something that only years and hard lessons could teach. Silence can be sharper than anger. It cuts deeper, slower, cleaner. So I just smiled, shook his hand, and said, "Sure, Eddie. Let's build something together again." He thought it was an olive branch. He didn't know it was a mirror. Those next few months, they were like stepping into a time machine. Working beside Eddie again brought back memories. The laughter, the banter, the old rhythm of two friends chasing a dream. But this time, the stage had changed. He wasn't the golden boy anymore, and I wasn't the kid covered in concrete dust, waiting for scraps of praise. I was the contractor running the show, his project, my command. The first week was tense. Eddie tried to act casual, cracking jokes, patting me on the back like we were still those 20-something kids at Henderson Builders, but his laugh didn't reach his eyes. When we walked job sites together, the crew would turn to me for decisions. "Mr. Delaney, should we pour the West Foundation first? Mr. Delaney, do we adjust the budget here?" Every Mr. Delaney was a quiet reminder of how far I'd come, and how far he'd fallen, and Eddie felt it. I could see it in his posture, that slight flinch every time someone used my name with respect. He used to mock me for that name. Now he had to watch it command an entire team. The first big test came during a budget review meeting. Eddie was sweating bullets over the numbers. His company was already stretched thin, and this project was supposed to be his redemption, the one that would convince investors he still had control. But I knew the truth. The paperwork was a mess. Subcontractors unpaid. Materials delayed. Permits hanging by a thread. He slid a folder across the table, trying to hide the desperation in his voice. "Frank, we're a bit over budget, but if we can move some figures around, we'll make it." I flipped through the numbers and caught it immediately. Hidden costs, small lies dressed as adjustments, old Eddie tricks. I closed the folder and met his eyes. "You sure you want to go that route again?" He blinked. "What route?" "The one where you promise the world, then cut corners until it collapses under you." He laughed weakly. "Come on, Frank, it's just how business works." I leaned back. "No, it's how you work, but not me." For a moment, neither of us said a word. The room was quiet except for the hum of the AC and the distant clatter of machinery outside. Then he nodded slowly, eyes down. "You're right." That was the first time I'd ever heard him admit it. But it wasn't humility. It was survival. Weeks passed. Day by day, I watched him crumble. Not in some dramatic, movie-style breakdown, but in the small, human ways that tell you a man's losing his grip. He'd show up late to meetings, forget names, avoid eye contact with the workers. His once polished suit started to look wrinkled. His gold watch hung loose on his thinning wrist. He was unraveling, quietly, privately, and the strange thing was, I didn't feel joy, not anymore. The younger me would have smiled at his downfall, but the older me, the man who'd spent decades earning every dollar, every handshake, felt something different, something closer to pity. Because I realized then, Eddie wasn't evil. He was hollow, a man so desperate to look successful that he forgot how to be successful. One afternoon, we were walking through the site, a massive renovation downtown, sunlight bouncing off the steel beams. Eddie stopped beside one of the half-finished walls and just stared at it. "Hard to believe, huh?" he said quietly. "All these years later and we're still building walls." "Difference is," I said, "you used to build them around people. I build them for them." He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time in decades, I saw it, regret. Not the kind you fake to earn sympathy, but the real kind. The kind that makes a man's eyes wet before he even blinks. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but I cut him off. "Don't. Just do better this time." That was it. No speech, no revenge monologue, just a quiet challenge, because truth is, life had already dealt him the punishment I never could. He was living it. The slow burn of seeing someone you underestimated rise above you, not through luck or shortcuts, but through patience and grit. That night, I sat in my truck outside. The site, long after everyone had gone home, the air smelled like wet concrete and dust, and the kind of scent that never really leaves your skin after years in the trade. Thought about how strange the world is. 15 years ago, I would have given anything to trade places with Eddie Collins. Now, sitting there in my old Ford, watching the lights flicker across the half-built structure, I wouldn't have swapped with him for all the glass towers in Texas. He had wealth once, but no peace. I had calloused hands, but I slept without guilt. And that's when I realized, and this wasn't just a job, it was a test, not of skill, not of business, but of character. Could I face the man who betrayed me? And still choose dignity over vengeance? That's what life was asking me, and for once, I was ready to answer without anger. Still, I won't lie. There were moments. Moments when the old bitterness tried to crawl back in, like when I'd see him take credit for something my crew did. Or when he'd smile for the investors like nothing had ever happened. But every time that bitterness rose, I reminded myself I wasn't here to destroy him. I was here to rebuild myself. And maybe, just maybe, help him see what real success looked like. Not numbers, not applause, but earning back the respect you once threw away. So I stayed patient. I stayed silent, and as the project took shape and steel rising, glass gleaming, concrete hardening in the Texas sun, I could feel something shifting in both of us. Eddie was learning what humility felt like, and I was learning what forgiveness really costs. It's not about forgetting, it's about refusing to let the past own your peace, and that was my silent revenge, not shouting, not exposing, just showing that the man he called a nobody was the one quietly teaching him how to rebuild his soul. The last morning on site felt heavier than usual, the kind of morning that doesn't just mark the end of a project, but the end of an era. Houston's heat shimmered off the glass tower, the light bouncing in a way that almost blinded you if you stared too long. I stood at the curb, hands in my pockets, watching the reflection of my crew moving around like a well-oiled machine, loading up trucks, rolling up blueprints, laughing the way working men do when the job's finally done right. The project had taken 6 long months, 6 months of sweat, concrete dust, quiet endurance, and unspoken history. But now, as the finishing touches came together, I felt something deeper than pride, something like release. Eddie arrived late that morning. That wasn't new. He'd been arriving late more and more as the months went on. But this time he wasn't wearing his usual sharp grin. He looked smaller somehow, like the building behind us had taken a piece out of him. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes had that dull shine of a man pretending everything was fine. "Frank," he said, walking over with that same half-hearted charm. "Hell of a job, really. Couldn't have pulled it off without you." He said it loud enough for the investors to hear, but when they turned away, his smile fell. We both knew the truth. I didn't just help build that project. I'd saved it, and maybe, somewhere deep down, that's what bothered him the most. The workers began pulling down the scaffolding, and for a brief second, the afternoon sun hit the new glass, panels just right, and I saw our reflections. Standing side by side, 2 men, same age, different lives. One built something out of honesty and grit. The other built something out of pride and debt, and life had finally evened the score. Eddie kicked at the dirt with his boot. "You know, Frank," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks." "About what?" "About how we got here." He looked up at the tower, our tower, and his voice cracked just slightly. "You remember when we used to talk about owning something like this? Sitting in that beat-up Chevy, drinking cheap beer, dreaming about the skyline?" I nodded. I remembered every second of it. The laughter, the hope, the promises we thought were carved in stone. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I remember." He exhaled, his voice trembling. "I messed that up. I messed us up. I don't even know why. Maybe I just didn't think you'd ever make it without me." That line hit hard, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. It was the first real truth Eddie had spoken in years. "I thought I needed to get ahead," he continued. "Didn't realize I was burning bridges I'd need to cross later." I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the man who betrayed me, but as the man who'd lost himself somewhere in the chase. And for a flicker of a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. When the investors finally left and the noise settled, it was just the 2 of us standing outside that gleaming building. The workers were mounting the final sign. Big, silver letters being fixed into place above the glass doors. Eddie watched them curiously, hands on his hips, squinting against the glare. Then he turned to me. "So who's the client this time?" You said this was a joint project, right? I just smiled. You'll see in a minute. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of the power tools. One by one, those letters went up. I could see his reflection in the glass as the sign came together, and I swear I could feel the moment his breath caught. His eyes widened, his lips parting slightly as he read it. Wait, yeah, I said quietly. My name. He turned slowly, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. You mean this whole project, this was yours? I nodded. Delaney Construction Group. We financed, designed, and built it. Collins Developments was just a subcontractor. You handled the paperwork, but this... I gestured to the towering glass structure behind us. This is mine. He took a step back, blinking, trying to process it. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, I saw the pride crumble right out of him. That's your name, he muttered almost to himself. That's your damn name on the glass. It's gonna stay there long after we're gone, I said softly. There was silence. Not the kind filled with anger, but the heavy, still kind that only comes after truth finally has its say. Eddie looked up at that shining sign like it was a mirror reflecting every bad choice he'd ever made. He swallowed hard. You remember what I called you? I nodded. I remember. He dropped his gaze. Frank, I was young, stupid. I thought success was about how loud your name could echo. But it turns out the only echoes I hear now are the ones that won't let me sleep. For the first time in decades, there was no charm, no pretense, just a tired man standing in front of his own mistakes. And I believed him. But belief doesn't erase scars. You didn't just steal a business idea. Eddie, I said quietly, you stole my faith in people. You made me believe that trust was a fool's game. That hard work didn't matter if you didn't have money or friends in high places. He looked at me, eyes glassy. I'm sorry, Frank, I really am. I thought I was winning. But now I realize I was just running from myself. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a drill as the crew tightened the last bolt on the sign above us. The silver letters gleamed bright against the blue sky. Delaney Construction Group. Bold, solid, unwavering. Eddie's voice cracked when he spoke again. Guess you got your payback now, huh? I shook my head slowly. No, Eddie, this isn't payback. This is proof. Proof that you can bury a man's name, but you can't bury his work. You can take everything he owns, but not who he is. He looked up again, and I saw tears forming at the corners of his eyes. Not dramatic tears and quiet ones. The kind a proud man fights to hide. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just a long, shaky breath. As the sun began to sink behind the skyline, the building glowed like fire, golden reflections dancing across the windows. I stood there beside him, both of us staring at the same glass but seeing completely different things. He saw the ghosts of what he'd lost. I saw the proof of what I'd built. And maybe, in some strange way, that was the closure we both needed. I didn't feel anger anymore. Not even satisfaction. Just peace. Because the truth had finally spoken. Not through arguments or revenge, but through time, work, and quiet perseverance. I turned to leave. But before I did, I placed a hand on his shoulder. You were right about one thing, Eddie. Success does change people. It just doesn't change who they are, and it reveals them. He looked at me, confused. And what did it reveal about me? I paused, meeting his tired eyes. That you always wanted to be the man standing here. But you never learned how to build without breaking others. Then I walked away. Behind me, I could hear the faint hum of the city, traffic, construction, life moving forward. Ahead of me was my truck, old and worn but still running strong. Just like me, I climbed in, started the engine, and took one last look at the reflection in the glass tower. My name, clear, bold, shining, and Eddie Collins standing beneath it, small and silent like a ghost fading in daylight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a nobody. I felt like a man who had finally built something that no one could take away. And the best part? I didn't have to destroy him to get there, I just had to keep building. One honest brick at a time. 2 months after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the glass tower we'd built together gleamed under the Texas sun, my name shining across it like a seal of quiet triumph. But for Eddie Collins, that light was fading fast. The whispers started small, as they always do. A delayed payment here, a canceled deal there. I'd been around long enough to recognize the smell of decay when it starts creeping into a business. The desperate phone calls, The polite lies, the shifting tone in people's voices when your name doesn't carry weight anymore. Then, one morning over coffee, I heard it on the local news. Collins Developments faces bankruptcy amid mounting debts. The anchor said it casually, the way people report other people's disasters, and detached, almost routine. But to me, it wasn't just another headline. It was the final act of a story that had started long ago in a dusty warehouse, when a younger version of me was told I'd never make it on my own. I stared at the TV, the volume low, the hum of the ceiling fan mixing with the reporter's voice. They showed his office, emptied out. Foreclosure notice taped to the glass door. They showed the men who once toasted with him at luxury bars now shaking their heads, pretending they barely knew him, and for the first time, I realized Eddie wasn't just losing money, he was losing his mask. When a man builds his life on ego, every crack feels like an earthquake, and Eddie's empire? It didn't crumble overnight. It rotted from within. Contracts fell through. Suppliers stopped taking his calls. Lawsuits stacked like unpaid bills on a desk he no longer owned. I heard through the grapevine that he sold his house in the suburbs, traded the shiny car for something older, smaller. He was living alone, people said, drinking too much. Avoiding old friends, it wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not exactly, more like inevitability, like watching the tide come in after warning someone not to build their home too close to the shore. Then one night, the phone rang. It was late, past midnight, and the rain was coming down hard, drumming against the windows of my small home office. I almost didn't answer, but something in the sound of that call, that long, weary ring, made me pick it up. I pressed the phone to my ear and didn't speak first. There was silence for a few seconds. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months, hoarse, defeated, stripped of the confidence that used to fill a room. Frank, just my name. No introduction, no pretense. Yeah, I said quietly. It's me. He let out a shaky breath. I didn't know who else to call. I didn't reply. I just listened. To the rain, to his breathing, to the sound of a man whose pride had finally broken under the weight of his own choices. I need a loan, he said finally. His voice cracked halfway through the word need. Just enough to get back on my feet. I swear I'll pay you back. I just need a chance. For a moment, I said nothing, not out of cruelty, Mom, but because I was remembering everything, every humiliation, every sleepless night when I wondered if maybe he was right, that I was a nobody. Every time I'd swallowed anger and smiled through pain just to survive, now here he was, the same man who once called me nothing, calling me for help. There's a kind of silence that says more than words ever could. That night, I held that silence like a mirror up to him. Finally, I spoke. Eddie, I said slowly, sometimes losing everything is how you finally learn what matters. I could hear him breathing on the other end, shallow, unsteady. For a brief second, I thought he might argue, curse, beg, but instead he just whispered, yeah, maybe you're right. And then, before I could say another word, the line went dead. I sat there for a while staring at the dark window, watching raindrops streak down the glass like the slow fall of years. There was no satisfaction in that call, no sense of victory, only a strange, quiet sadness, like watching a man drown in waters he once claimed he could walk across. Because truth is, I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace, and maybe, in that moment, so did he. I placed the phone down and leaned back in my chair, the ticking of the wall clock filling the room. He had finally reached the same place I had years ago, rock bottom. The difference was, I'd built my way up from it. He'd dug himself into it, and that's when I realized, revenge doesn't come from destroying someone else. It comes from standing where they thought you never could, and feeling nothing but pity. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, it's over. But I knew deep down that fate wasn't done yet. Sometimes, the fall isn't the end. Sometimes it's the quiet before the final reckoning. The first time I stood across the street and saw my company's name, Delaney Construction Group, gleaming across that glass tower, I didn't feel the rush of pride I thought I would. I didn't feel that movie-like triumph, that swelling moment where violins play and the hero finally gets his due. No, what I felt was quieter. Still, like standing on a mountaintop after a long, grueling climb, breathing thin, cold air. realizing you didn't conquer the mountain. You survived it. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was redemption, and it wasn't about proving Eddie wrong. It was about proving me right, proving that the way I chose to live my life, the values my father taught me still meant something in a world that rewards shortcuts. That morning, the Texas sun caught the glass just right, 1,000 fragments of light dancing off the panels. The air smelled faintly of concrete dust and new beginnings. I could hear the hum of traffic, the faint echo of power tools somewhere nearby, the distant chatter of workers taking lunch breaks. It was the sound of work, honest, steady, unglamorous, and somehow, it felt like home. I stood there in my work boots, a cup of black coffee in one hand, and looked up at those bold silver letters stretching across the top floor. My name, not just painted, not just a sticker, etched into the building itself. Permanent. Solid. Like all the things I had once thought were out of reach. Funny thing was, that name used to embarrass me. When I was younger, I thought Delaney sounded too plain, too ordinary. The kind of name you'd find on a gas station receipt. Not a skyscraper, but now, seeing it up there, it didn't look plain at all. It looked earned. I remember the first time I'd ever written that name on a wall. I was 20, working on a new housing development out near Baytown. We were pouring foundation and I scratched FD into the wet concrete. The foreman yelled at me for it. Said it was unprofessional. I just smiled and said, "One day, people are going to want my name on their buildings." The other guys laughed, but I wasn't joking. I just didn't know it would take nearly 4 decades for that day to come. Sometimes, when I pass that tower now, especially at night, when the city's quiet and the glass reflects the skyline, I stop and look at my reflection. There's something about seeing yourself in the very thing you built that words can't capture. The face looking back at me isn't the same. One Eddie used to mock, the hair's grayer, the eyes more tired, the shoulders heavier. But there's a steadiness there, a kind of calm you only earn by walking through storms and coming out still standing. I whisper to that reflection sometimes. I know it sounds strange, but it's like talking to an old friend I left behind years ago. I tell him, "You weren't a nobody, Frank, you were just waiting for your time." And every time I say it, something inside me settles, because the truth is, I didn't just build a company. I built a life that no one could take from me again. There's a lobby inside that building. Marble floors. Quiet hum of air conditioning. The faint echo of heels clicking across the tiles. In the center stands a plaque with my company's story engraved on it. Not the whole story, and not the betrayal, not the tears. Not the nights I slept in my truck because I couldn't afford rent. But enough to remind people that greatness doesn't come easy. Sometimes I see young men and women stop to read it. They trace their fingers across my name, maybe wondering what kind of man built this place. They don't know that once. I was just like them, broke, doubted, dismissed. If one of them looks up and thinks, maybe I can do it too, then maybe that's the real legacy I'm leaving behind. There's something else I've noticed. 2, people walk differently when they pass a building with your name on it. They straighten up. They glance at you with a mix of respect and curiosity. It's flattering, sure, but also humbling, because they don't know the cost. They don't know about the hands that bled, the nights that felt endless, the friendships that turned to dust. Success looks shiny from the outside, but it's built on invisible scars, and that's what makes it beautiful. Not the glass, not the logo, not the corner office, but the truth behind it. I still drive my old Ford truck to work most days. It's got dings on the sides and a rattle when you hit 50, but it reminds me where I came from. When I park near the tower, security sometimes tries to wave me to the delivery entrance, and they think I'm one of the workers. I don't correct them. I smile, park where they tell me, and walk inside with my lunchbox like I always did. Because no matter how high you climb, you should never forget the ground that lifted you. The day we officially opened the building, there was a small ceremony, press, partners, a few city officials. Everyone clapped when I gave a short speech. But after it was over, when the crowd had gone and the photographers packed up their gear, I stayed behind for a while. I walked through the empty halls, ran my fingers along the cool glass walls and whispered, "This is for every man who was told he wasn't enough." And I meant it, because somewhere out there, There's another kid like I was, standing in the dust holding a hammer, dreaming of something impossible. Maybe one day he'll walk past this same tower, see the name Delaney and realize it's not about fame, it's about faith. In yourself, in your work, and in the long, patient road that gets you there. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the city lights flickered on, and my name began to glow against the night sky, and I stood there one last time, looking up. I didn't think about Eddie. I didn't think about the betrayal. I just thought about that boy who once stood on a job site, wiping sweat from his brow, staring at a half-built wall and daring to dream. He finally made it, not because the world believed in him, but because he refused to stop believing in himself. And that's when I realized I didn't build a building. I built forgiveness. One brick, one day, one heartbreak at a time. These days, my mornings start quieter. The phone doesn't ring as often, and when it does, it's not because someone's in crisis. It's because a young man or woman wants advice. They show up at my office, eyes full of ambition, hands a little too clean, but hearts in the right place. They remind me of me 30 years ago, before life taught me that dreams aren't built in air-conditioned rooms or drawn up on fancy paper. They're built out there in the dust where the sun burns your neck and you learn what grit really means. So now I mentor them, not because I have to, not because it's profitable, but because someone once told me I'd never be anybody, and I swore that no kid who came to me for help would ever walk away feeling like that. They sit across from me in this glass office, the one with my name on the door, and I can see it in their eyes. The hunger, the doubt, the quiet fear of not making it, and I always tell them the same thing. Don't chase people, chase purpose. Because that's the truth nobody teaches you. You can chase approval your whole life. Friends, bosses, partners, and still end up empty. But if you chase purpose, the right people will find you. I tell them stories not about my success, but about my failures. About the nights I sat in my truck counting quarters for gas money. About the time I almost quit because I couldn't see past the struggle. About Eddie. Though I don't always use his name. I call him the friend who taught me what loyalty isn't. They listen closely when I speak about him. There's something about betrayal that stirs everyone. Maybe because deep down, we've all been let down by someone we trusted. But I always finish the story the same way. The world has a funny way of keeping score, I say, but you don't have to do the math. I let that sink in, because what I learned, the hard way, is that life balances the books eventually. You don't need revenge. You just need patience and faith in your own work. Sometimes, I walk the job sites with them. I like feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots, the smell of wet cement, the clang of steel echoing against the morning air. It takes me back to those first years when I was the one running around with a tape measure, trying to prove myself. The young ones, they move fast, impatient to finish, to climb. To make a name, I tell them to slow down. Concrete takes time to set, I remind them. So do you. They laugh at first, but after a few tough months, after a project falls apart or a deal slips away, they understand. They always do. There's one kid in particular. Name's Tyler, 24, smart, talented, but always rushing, always comparing himself to others. One day, after a long site inspection, he looked at me and said, "Mr. Delaney, how did you know you were going to make it?" I smiled. "I didn't," he frowned. "Then why didn't you quit?" I looked out at the half-built foundation we were standing on. "Because I wasn't building for them," I said. "I was building for me." He nodded slowly. I could see it in his eyes, that quiet click of understanding. That's the moment every young man has to face, when he realizes that success isn't about beating someone else. It's about becoming someone better than you were yesterday. Every now and then, someone asks me if I ever saw Eddie again. Did. Once it was at a charity event downtown, one of those fancy gatherings, with polished floors and champagne that costs more than my first month's rent used to. He was thinner, older, the sharpness in his eyes dulled by time. We made small talk. Polite, surface level. He told me he was trying to get back on his feet, working as a consultant now. I nodded, wished him well. Before we parted, he said something I didn't expect. "You were right, Frank, about everything." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. "Maybe we both learned something," I told him. He chuckled, shook my hand, and walked away into the crowd. And that was the last time I saw him. Some nights, when the office is empty and the city hums softly outside my window, I sit there and think about that handshake. There was no bitterness in it, no lingering resentment, just two men who took very different roads and finally understood where they each led. That's the thing about time, and it humbles everyone. Sooner or later, I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength wearing gentleness. It's the only way to stop carrying someone else's mistakes in your heart. Now, when I look around my office, framed blueprints, photos of completed buildings, certificates I never thought I'd earn, I realize something. All of it means nothing if I don't pass the lesson on. So when those young builders walk out of here, I make sure they carry more than just advice. I make sure they carry perspective. Because someday, life will test them, the way it tested me. They'll lose a friend, a deal, a dream, and when that happens, I hope they remember my words. Don't chase people. Chase purpose. And when success finally comes, let your silence speak louder than their doubts. I still visit job sites from time to time. Sometimes I'll stand back and watch the younger crews work, hear them joke, argue, dream. It makes me smile, knowing that the world keeps building, one generation at a time, and as I drive away, the reflection of my name on that glass tower appears in my rearview mirror. Steady, strong, unmoving, life settled its debts, and it did it far better than I ever could. So I keep giving back, not to rewrite my story, but to help someone else start theirs. Because if there's one thing I've learned after all these years, it's this. Success isn't the building with your name on it. It's the people who believe they can build theirs because of you. And that's the real legacy I'll leave behind. If Eddie Collins ever hears this story, and I have a feeling one day he might, I hope he knows this. I forgave him long ago. Not because he earned it, not because he ever apologized the way he should have, but because I needed peace more than I needed payback. For a long time, I carried that anger like a hammer in my chest, and heavy, ready to strike. Every success I had in those early years, I measured against his name, his company, his shadow, and let me tell you, that kind of living, it eats at you. You think revenge is fuel, but it burns fast, and all it leaves behind is smoke. So, one night, years back, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights were flickering below, the hum of traffic fading as the hour got late. I looked up at my reflection in the glass, my name glowing faintly behind me, and I asked myself a simple question. What more do you want, Frank? And the truth hit me harder than any betrayal ever did. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted to rest. I wanted to stop living as a man who'd been wronged and start living as a man who'd risen. Revenge, I've learned, is loud. It wants applause, it craves an audience. It thrives on noise, on the moment you get to point a finger and say, see, I told you so. But forgiveness, that's a different kind of strength. That's quiet power, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight, the kind that lets you sleep at night, because the best kind of victory isn't about making your enemies fall to their knees. It's about standing tall enough that they have to look up to see you, and not because you towered over them, but because you rose above what they did to you. That's the part people don't understand. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. It means you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed revenge to feel alive. I remember one afternoon not long ago, I was driving past the glass tower again, the same one that started this whole reflection. The sun was setting, painting the windows gold. At the stoplight, I saw a young man on the sidewalk, probably in his 20s, staring up at the building. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder, work boots covered in dust. He didn't notice me watching, but I could see that look on his face and that quiet awe, that hunger for something bigger, and it made me smile. Because maybe he didn't know who Delaney was. Maybe he never heard the story behind the name on that glass. But he saw what I once dreamed of. A sign that said, it's possible. And that's when I realized something. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the years that tested me, and they weren't curses. They were foundations. They built me brick by brick into a man who could create something that lasts longer than bitterness ever could. So, If anyone out there hears this, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or laughed at, listen close. Don't waste your life trying to prove people wrong. That's a trap. Because the moment you live for their approval, you're still giving them power. Instead, build. Build when no one believes in you. Build when they mock you. Build when all you've got left is your hands and your faith. Because someday, those same people who called you a nobody will walk past something you made. A business, a home, a life, and realize your silence was your answer all along. And when they finally see your name, not in a book, not on a list, but on a building they can't ignore, and you'll know you've won. Not because they fell, but because you stood. As for me, I don't look back with anger anymore. When I think of Eddie, I don't see the man who betrayed me. I see the man who taught me patience, resilience, and restraint. He gave me the push I needed to find my own path, and for that, I'm oddly grateful. Life has a funny way of settling its own debts. It doesn't always do it on your schedule, but it never forgets. The wheel turns quietly, perfectly, until everyone gets what they've earned, one way or another. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the lobby of that tower. It's empty, except for the soft hum of the lights and the echo of my footsteps. I look up at the plaque with my name, and I run my fingers over the cool metal letters, and I whisper, "You did it, Frank, not for them, for you." Then I turn, walk outside, and feel the warm Texas wind on my face. The city keeps moving, life keeps building, and I keep forgiving. Because forgiveness, that's the final word. It's the one that echoes long after the noise of revenge fades away. And in that silence, I finally found what I'd been chasing all along. Not success, not recognition, but peace.